morning sun cast golden ripples across the River Jordan as Naomi knelt at its edge, cupping the cool water in her hands. 28 years she had lived in silence, her voice stolen by a childhood illness that had nearly claimed her life. She splashed her face, welcoming the refreshing touch against her skin, still warm from the 2-hour walk from her village. From behind her came the gentle pressure of a hand on her shoulder, her younger sister, Leah. "We should join the others," Leah said, gesturing toward the growing crowd in the distance. "He might already be speaking." Naomi nodded, rising to her feet. Her hands moved swiftly in the private language the sisters had developed over the years. "I am afraid," Leah squeezed her hand. "Don't be. What do we have to lose?" What indeed, Naomi thought. She had lived her entire adult life with sealed lips, communicating through gestures and the occasional sounds she could force from her throat. The villagers called her the Silent One. Children sometimes mocked her, and more than one potential husband had walked away upon learning of her affliction. Only her family, Leah especially, had taken the time to truly know her heart. The crowd had swelled considerably since they'd arrived at dawn. Word had spread quickly through the region that the teacher from Nazareth was returning to the Jordan, where John had once baptized him. People from as far as Jerusalem had made the journey, bringing their sick, their lame, their possessed. Stories of his miracles had reached even their small village near Jericho. "There are too many people," Leah fretted as they approached the throng. "We'll never get close enough." Naomi's hands moved again. "We will try." They joined the outer edges of the crowd, where Naomi could smell sweat and dust and desperation. Children sat on their father's shoulders for a better view. Women balanced infants on their hips. The sick moaned from makeshift pallets. All eyes focused on a small rise near the riverbank where a group of men had gathered. Naomi stood on her tiptoes, straining to see. There, in the center of the group, stood a man in simple robes, his beard neatly trimmed, his hands moving expressively as he spoke. Nothing about his appearance suggested divinity or power. He looked like any tradesman from their village, and yet something in his presence commanded attention. His voice carried across the crowd, strong but gentle. "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Leah's grip on her sister's arm tightened. "That's him. That's Jesus." Naomi felt her heart quicken. For weeks, she had wrestled with whether to make this journey. She was not one to chase after miracle workers and prophets. Too many had passed through the region, promising healing but delivering only false hope. Yet something about the stories of this man had touched her, not just accounts of his healings, but of his words, his compassion, the way he treated those whom society had cast aside. "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted," Jesus continued, his gaze sweeping across the multitude. "Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth." Each blessing fell like gentle rain on Naomi's heart. Though she stood far from him, she felt as if he were speaking directly to her soul. "We need to get closer," Leah whispered urgently. "After he finishes teaching, people will surround him for healing. We must be near." Naomi hesitated. The crowd was dense, and she had always avoided such crushing closeness. Years of being unable to cry out, to object vocally, had made her wary of situations where she might be trapped or overwhelmed. But Leah was already pulling her forward, weaving between bodies with determined grace. "Excuse us, please," Leah murmured as they pressed forward. "My sister needs healing. Please, make way." Some turned with annoyed expressions that softened when they saw Naomi's pleading eyes. Others, absorbed in the teacher's words, barely noticed as the women slipped past. Inch by inch, they moved closer to the front. Jesus was now speaking about the law, about righteousness that exceeded that of the scribes and Pharisees. Several religious leaders stood at the edges of the crowd, their faces stern with disapproval. Naomi noticed one, an older man with a silver-streaked beard, watching Jesus with particular intensity, eyes narrowed in judgment. "You have heard that it was said, 'Love your neighbor and hate your enemy,'" Jesus was saying. "But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. The words pierced Naomi unexpectedly. She thought of the village elders who had denied her a place among the women at festivals because her silence was unsettling. She thought of the merchant who refused to trade with her directly, insisting she bring a speaking person to his stall. She had carried bitterness toward these people for years, small hardened seeds in her heart. By the time Jesus concluded his teaching, Naomi and Leah had managed to position themselves merely 20 paces from where he stood. As he finished, the crowd surged forward. Parents thrust sick children toward him. An elderly man cried out about his blindness. A woman fell to her knees, begging for her demon-possessed son. Jesus received them all with calm compassion. His hands moved from person to person, touching a leper without hesitation, placing fingers gently on closed eyelids, commanding unclean spirits to depart. With each healing, gasps and cries of amazement rippled through the crowd. "We're losing our chance," Leah said anxiously as more people pushed forward. "There are too many." Naomi felt a momentary despair. They had come so far, waited so long. She watched as Jesus bent down to a small girl whose twisted legs straightened at his touch. The child's laughter rang out, bright and joyous as she took her first steps. Then, unexpectedly, Jesus raised his head and looked directly at Naomi. Across the space between them, their eyes met. In that instant, she felt stripped bare, as if he could see every hurt, every silent scream, every prayer she had ever offered into the void. His expression held such knowing gentleness that tears sprang to her eyes. Jesus turned to one of his disciples, spoke briefly, then began walking toward the river, toward her, as the crowd parted before him. "He's coming this way," Leah gasped, gripping Naomi's arm so tightly it hurt. Naomi couldn't move. Her feet seemed rooted to the earth as Jesus approached. He stopped before her, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, the lines etched by sun and smiling around their corners. "You have carried your silence like a heavy stone," he said softly. His voice meant only for her ears. "Your heart has spoken many words that your lips could not form." Tears streamed down Naomi's face. No one had ever acknowledged her silent suffering so completely, with such perfect understanding. She tried to form her hands into shapes to communicate her gratitude for being seen, but they trembled too violently. Jesus reached out, his thumb gently touching her lips, then her throat. His hands were calloused, the hands of a carpenter, but his touch was feather-light. "Ephphatha," he said, "be opened." A warmth like summer sunlight spread from his fingertips into Naomi's throat, radiating outward until her entire body felt suffused with heat. Something shifted deep within, a knot unraveling, a door unlocking. She gasped, and the gasp itself transformed into a sound she had not made since childhood. The word emerged broken, rusty from disuse. Jesus smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Your faith has made you well. Go in peace." "Thank you," Naomi whispered, the words strange and wonderful on her tongue. "Thank you, Lord." Jesus nodded once, then turned away to attend to others seeking healing. Leah was weeping openly now, embracing her sister as the crowd pressed around them, witnesses murmuring in amazement. "Praise God," an old woman next to them kept saying. "Praise the Holy One of Israel." Naomi could only stand there, her hand at her throat, feeling the vibration as she experimentally hummed. A sound. Her sound. The silence of nearly 3 decades, broken by 2 simple words. "Be opened." As they walked home that evening, the setting sun painting the hills in shades of amber and rose, Naomi couldn't stop talking. Her voice was hoarse, unpracticed, sometimes faltering over words she had only ever said in her mind. But it was hers. She named everything they passed: rock, tree, bird, laughing at the sheer joy of sound. "I want to sing," she told Leah as they neared their village. "I want to learn every song our mother sang to us." Leah wiped away tears. "Your voice is more beautiful than I imagined it would be." "There is so much to say," Naomi marveled. So many words stored up inside me. News of the miracle had somehow outpaced their journey home. As they approached the village, people emerged from their homes, staring in wonder. The elder who had often excluded Naomi from women's gatherings approached cautiously. "Is it true?" she asked. "Has your tongue been loosed?" "It is true," Naomi replied, the words still feeling like precious gems in her mouth. "The teacher from Nazareth has healed me. Speak your name," someone called from the gathering crowd. "Let us hear you say your name." Naomi smiled. "I am Naomi, daughter of Eliezer and Hannah." She spoke clearly, savoring each syllable. "I have been silent, but now I speak." A cheer went up from the villagers. Even the merchant who had refused to trade with her came forward, marveling at the transformation. Children who had once mocked her now watched with wide, believing eyes. That night, as Naomi got ready for bed, she sat by the window and looked up at the stars. For the first time, she could whisper aloud, "Thank you. Thank you for this gift." She thought of Jesus, how he had truly seen her and freed her from silence. She remembered his words, "Let your light shine before others." Her voice was now that light. How would she let it shine? 3 months passed. Spring bloomed in the Jordan Valley and Naomi's voice grew stronger. She became a storyteller in the village, gathering children to share stories of faith. Her favorites were about Jesus, not just her healing, but everything she had witnessed that day by the river. Word had spread throughout the region about the miracles performed near Jericho. Some religious leaders began to speak against Jesus, calling him a blasphemer, a threat to sacred traditions. The silver-bearded Pharisee whom Naomi had noticed that day was among the loudest critics, warning people against following this false prophet. One afternoon, as Naomi gathered water at the village well, she overheard 2 travelers discussing Jesus' whereabouts. "They say he's returned to Jerusalem," one said. "The authorities seek to question him." "More than question," replied the other darkly. "The Sanhedrin sees him as dangerous. There's talk of arresting him before Passover." Naomi's hands tightened around her water jug. She had heard similar rumors in recent weeks. The joy of her healing had been tempered by growing concern for the man who had given her back her voice. That evening she approached Leah with determined eyes. "I must go to Jerusalem for Passover." Leah looked up from her weaving in surprise. "Jerusalem? But why?" "We never travel for the festivals." "I must find him," Naomi said simply. "I must hear him teach again. And I fear for him." "What could you possibly do if he truly is in danger?" Leah asked practically. "The authorities in Jerusalem are powerful. We are just simple women from a small village." Naomi touched her throat, a gesture that had become habitual since her healing. "He gave me a voice. I cannot remain silent if he needs witnesses to speak for him." Leah studied her sister's face, then nodded slowly. "Then I will go with you." The journey to Jerusalem took 3 days. The roads were crowded with pilgrims traveling for Passover, the air charged with anticipation. Jerusalem during festival season was transformed, markets overflowing with goods, streets filled with visitors from every province and beyond, the temple grounds bustling with worshippers and merchants. It was at the temple that Naomi and Leah first heard the definitive news. Jesus had indeed returned to Jerusalem, entering the city on a donkey while crowds waved palm branches and shouted, "Hosanna!" But he had then done something shocking. Overturned the tables of the money changers in the temple courtyard, driving them out with righteous anger. "The authorities are furious," a woman told them as they purchased offerings for the temple. "They say he claims to be the Son of God. They call it blasphemy." "Where is he now?" Naomi asked urgently. "Teaching in the temple by day," the woman replied, "but he leaves the city each evening. Some say he stays in Bethany with friends." For 2 days, Naomi and Leah attempted to find Jesus among the temple crowds, but he remained elusive. The sisters heard conflicting reports. He was debating with Sadducees in the court of Gentiles. No, he was teaching on the Mount of Olives. No, he had gone into hiding. On the third day of their search, as they rested on the steps of the temple, exhausted and discouraged, Naomi noticed a familiar figure, the silver-bearded Pharisee she had seen by the Jordan. He was deep in conversation with several temple guards, his expression grave and determined. "It must be tomorrow night," she overheard him saying. "After the Passover meal, when he retires to pray. We know his habits now." A chill ran through Naomi's body. Without thinking, she rose and approached the group. "Pardon me, sir," she said, her voice clear and steady. "But are you speaking of Jesus of Nazareth?" The Pharisee turned, his eyes narrowing, suspiciously. "What concern is it of yours, woman?" "I was healed by him," Naomi said simply. "I was mute from childhood until he touched me and spoke the word that gave me voice." "Another so-called miracle," the Pharisee scoffed. "Likely you were never truly mute. These deceptions serve only to misguide the people." Anger flashed through Naomi, not for the insult to herself, but for the dismissal of what Jesus had done. "My entire village can testify that I never spoke a word for 28 years. He healed me by the river Jordan, along with many others. I saw the lame walk, the blind see. These were not deceptions." The temple guards shifted uncomfortably, but the Pharisee's expression hardened. "This Nazarene breaks Sabbath laws, claims divine authority, and threatens the peace of our nation. Your one experience does not outweigh the danger he represents." "What danger?" Naomi challenged. "The danger of healing the sick, of teaching love for enemies, of bringing hope to the hopeless." "You speak with remarkable boldness for a woman," the Pharisee said coldly. "I suggest you return to your home and concern yourself with appropriate matters. Jerusalem is no place for provincial women to involve themselves in affairs of religious law." Leah appeared at Naomi's side, tugging at her arm. "Come, sister. This is not wise." But Naomi stood her ground. "If you move against him, know that there are hundreds like me who will speak of what we have witnessed. His words and deeds will not be forgotten." The Pharisee signaled to the guards, who stepped forward menacingly. "Go now, before your disrespect earns you punishment." Reluctantly, Naomi allowed Leah to pull her away. As they retreated through the temple courtyard, her mind raced. She had to find Jesus, to warn him of what she had overheard. That was dangerous, Leah admonished when they were safely away. "Those men have power here." "I couldn't stay silent," Naomi replied, her voice trembling with emotion. "Not when they plan to harm him." "What can we do?" Leah asked practically. "We don't know where to find him. We're strangers in this city." Naomi closed her eyes, remembering Jesus' gentle touch, his perceptive gaze. "He found me in a crowd of thousands. Perhaps he will find us now." That evening, as rumors swirled through Jerusalem about Jesus' whereabouts, Naomi and Leah joined a group of his followers gathered near the city gate. Among them was a woman named Mary from Magdala, who had also been healed by Jesus. "He knows. They seek to arrest him," Mary told them quietly. "Yet he does not flee." "Can we not protect him somehow?" Naomi asked desperately. Mary's eyes were sad but resolute. "He spoke to us of his coming death. He says it must happen, that he will suffer at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law." "But why?" Naomi cried. "Why must he suffer when he has done only good?" "He speaks of it as fulfillment of the scriptures," Mary replied. "He says on the third day he will rise again." Naomi shook her head in confusion. How could one rise from death? It made no sense. Yet neither had the miracle of her own healing seemed possible before it happened. As night fell, word came that Jesus and his disciples were sharing the Passover meal in a room within the city. Several of his followers planned to wait nearby, to pray through the night as he had asked them to do. "He will go to Gethsemane afterward," Mary explained. "He often prays there among the olive trees." Naomi and Leah joined the small group that kept vigil outside the upper room. Hours passed. Sometime after midnight, they saw Jesus emerge with his disciples, his face solemn in the torchlight as they made their way toward the Mount of Olives. "Should we follow?" Naomi whispered to Mary. "He asked for space to pray. Mary replied. "But we can watch from a distance." They trailed behind at a respectful distance, eventually settling among the trees where they could observe the Garden of Gethsemane. In the pale moonlight, they could just make out Jesus kneeling alone, his disciples some distance away. "He seems troubled," Leah murmured. Naomi nodded, her heart aching at the sight of his solitary figure. Even from this distance she could sense his anguish. The man who had healed so many now appeared to need comfort himself. Then came the sound of approaching footsteps, many footsteps. Torches illuminated the night as a group of armed men entered the garden, led by one of Jesus' own disciples. Naomi watched in horror as Judas stepped forward to identify Jesus with a kiss. "No," she gasped, starting to rise. "No, they can't." Mary pulled her back down. "We cannot stop this," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "He said it must happen." The arrest was swift and violent. Though one disciple drew a sword in defense, Jesus himself halted the resistance. He spoke words Naomi couldn't hear, then allowed himself to be bound and led away. His disciples scattered like leaves in the wind. "We must follow," Naomi insisted, already on her feet. "We must see where they take him." Through the darkened streets of Jerusalem, the small group of women followed at a safe distance as Jesus was taken first to the high priest's residence, then, as dawn broke, to the Roman governor's palace. They gathered with other supporters in the courtyard, straining to hear proceedings within. When Jesus was finally brought out, Naomi barely recognized him. He had been beaten, his face swollen, his back torn by whips. A crown of thorns had been mockingly pressed onto his head. Yet even in this state there was a dignity about high. This story of Naomi teaches us profound lessons for our journey. It shows us that a single encounter can completely transform our lives. Just as Naomi went from silence to becoming a storyteller, we too can be transformed when we truly encounter Jesus. Naomi teaches us about the power of gratitude. How often do we take for granted the gifts we've received? She recognized the value of her recovered voice and expressed her gratitude while looking at the stars. This story also reveals how our difficulties can be transformed into purpose. Naomi's suffering during her time of silence was not in vain. It became an essential part of her testimony and ministry. We learn that we should not keep to ourselves the blessings we receive. Naomi used her voice not just for herself, but to build up others, especially the children in the community. What a wonderful example of how to share the gifts God gives us. Naomi became a living testimony to Christ's transforming power, sharing not only her personal experience but everything she witnessed in him. She understood the meaning of letting your light shine. Brothers and sisters, may we reflect today. What is our voice? What gift have we received and how are we using it to bless others? Let us remember that our blessings have greater purpose when we share them to build up the community around us. May we be like Naomi, transformed by our encounter with Jesus and willing to use our gifts to shine his light in the world. Amen.